What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Larry. So I know I've been not really recording too much as of late, so I do apologize. I'm going to do a lot of catching up over the next few days in my next few episodes. Today's episode is going to be about the NBA Finals and the Celtics obviously getting a big win over the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games. I'll give my thoughts on the series and talk about a lot of things that the Celtics accomplished this season. Then after that, I'm going to give some Kevin Durant trade packages that I've had ready to go now for a couple weeks, but just never got to it, so I'm going to give you those. Then following that, going to give an update on Dan Hurley's situation. He's staying at UConn. I'm going to give my thoughts on that. Then at the end, I'm going to talk about yesterday's news, which Monty Williams was fired by the Detroit Pistons after just one season in Detroit. And then after that, I'm going to give my thoughts on breaking news that just went down over the last few minutes, and that's JJ Redick will be signing a 4-year deal to be the new head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. I'll give my thoughts on that at the end. So let's start off with the Celtics. They won the NBA Finals in 5 games over Dallas. Congrats to all Celtics fans out there listening. What a season for them. As you guys know from listening to this podcast, my radio show, I'm a big Clippers fan, so the Clippers are my number one team. But I do have a lot of friends and family that are Celtics fans, so I'm happy for them. Congratulations, as I've said, to all Celtics fans out there. The Celtics were very impressive in this series. They won, obviously, in 5, which is great to see. I said it should be a 5-game series, but I thought it would go 6. Since I thought Luka Doncic would get more calls. That was my prediction before the series began. Ended up going 5 games. That's the way I thought it should have went based on talent. The Celtics were the better team. That's just the story of the series. One of the most impressive things is the Celtics, how good they were on defense. They held the Mavericks to under 100 points in 4 of 5 games. Dallas only reached over 90 points in just 2 games in the series. They obviously had a great game 4, winning that game by 38 points. But besides that, the Celtics, for the most part, really shut them down defensively. The Mavericks did have their moments. They did push the Celtics at times, but realistically, they weren't going to be able to keep up with the Celtics in a 7-game series, especially when the Celtics pushed the ball and pushed the pace. It just wasn't in Dallas's abilities to try to keep up with that Boston team. The Mavericks did play better defensively than most people would expect. They held Boston to 107 points or less in all 5 games of the series. Obviously, ended up not going their way, losing the series 4-1. But that's just the way basketball goes sometimes. You can play great defensively, have your moments on offense. It really comes down to playing all 48 minutes. And the Celtics, for the most part, played very, very well the entire playoffs in close games. That was something I criticized them about in the past, was close games the Celtics struggled in, at least in the regular season, in some big moments. They used to brick shots, they turned the ball over, the offense couldn't really set up. They love going ISO in big moments when they're struggling to score the ball late in the fourth quarter. But that wasn't the case in the playoffs for the most part. The Celtics really responded very well in close games. One thing that didn't go well for Dallas was Kyrie Irving was completely cold from the floor, did not help the Mavericks out to the degree that they needed. Credit to the Celtics defense, though. They really put pressure on him and took away his first step to make him work very, very hard for every shot attempt he got. He didn't seem to let the crowd get in his head like he did in the past when he was with Brooklyn. He already has won a ring, which definitely helps. That probably plays a little bit of a role in him playing a little bit more focused, considering he's been there before and he's already won. And obviously at times in the NBA Finals with Cleveland, besides winning that one ring. But he definitely did struggle playing against Boston in Boston this postseason. 14.3 points per game he averaged at the TD Garden, with 5.7 assists per game in 3 games, shooting 34% from the floor, 3 of 17 from 3, which is 18%, and had a minus 33 plus minus, which obviously shows he was struggling to be effective out there on the floor. Credit to Boston, though, as I said, they took away that first step, made him work really, really hard for the shot attempts he got. With that being said, Kyrie Irving is still one of the most talented players in the NBA. Obviously, things did not work out in this series, but like I've noted before, if I could play basketball like any player at the NBA and take anyone's talent and play like that, it's Kyrie Irving. Gets to the bucket with ease. Even in this series where he struggled, he still had a play or two every single game where you look at a layup and you just say not many people could get to the bucket and finish in the lane like Kyrie Irving. With that all being said, though, I do think the Celtics fans need to move on from the Kyrie Irving hate. Obviously, things didn't work out when he played for Boston, but it seems like Kyrie moved on. He's in a better place now. The Celtics now obviously are in a better place now as well, getting their ring. They should care more about that than bashing Kyrie. I thought it was a really nice gesture by Kyrie Irving to dap up some of the Celtics players and coaches before checking out in Game 5 with 2 minutes to go. It shows he wanted to show some respect to the guys he was battling against, some of his former teammates, some former coaches. It shows he obviously cared to show them the respect that they deserved and congratulate them on winning the championship. So after I've defended Kyrie, obviously now for the last minute or two, the reality is he needed to play better. He needed to play better. But even if he did play better, the Celtics still were the better team. If Kyrie plays better in the series, Dallas may win one more game tops. It probably goes to 6. The reality is the Celtics were too good and too complete of a team for Dallas to compete with. You can't expect Derrick Jones Jr., who I'm a big fan of, and PJ Washington to have the biggest series of their careers like they did versus Oklahoma City and the Clippers, which on both ends of the floor, they were very effective in both those series, even against Minnesota as well. You can't expect them to do that much, though, against this Celtics team and have another great series. The reality is the Celtics did a great job of driving and kicking out the ball, obviously getting it to their shooters. Even though the Celtics didn't shoot that well, they still hit some big shots. And they also pushed the pace on offense. That made it tough for Dallas to get back on defense and set up. Credit to Joe Mazzulla. He obviously had a game plan that worked. The youngest head coach now to win the NBA title since Bill Russell did it in 1969. So the youngest since 1969. Very impressive stat there. The Celtics finished 16-3 in the playoffs with a plus 153 point differential. Shows how dominant they were. Overall, they set a lot of records this season. In the regular season, they won the Eastern Conference in the regular season by 14 games, the most since 1976. Their longest losing streak this season was 2 games. And they had an 11.34 scoring margin per game, which was 5th best in NBA history. In the playoffs, they never trailed in a series, and they had a 10.72 scoring margin on average in the playoffs this year, which was 6th best in NBA playoff history. So obviously the Celtics deserved to win. They were the best team overall. It's important to give Jaylen Brown the credit he deserves. He went from being the biggest piece in every trade rumor for Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, Paul George, and Jimmy Butler over the last 3 or 4 years, to almost being ran out of town last year after getting the biggest contract in NBA history last offseason. And now, after pushing through all of the adversity he's had to face and all of the criticism he's got over the last few years, he's now won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP and the NBA Finals MVP. Obviously, very well deserved. He was great in both series. Brown and Tatum played 107 playoff games together, the most ever by a duo prior to winning a championship in the NBA Finals. So obviously very impressive that they were finally able to put things together. I know I've criticized those two guys in the past and said I didn't think they'd win a championship together and that I would side with Jaylen Brown over Jason Tatum. I'm still more of a fan of Jaylen Brown than I am Jason Tatum, but obviously they found a way to win a championship. But I don't think that championship happens without getting Jrue Holiday and getting Kristaps Porzingis. So Brad Stevens, who I'm going to get to in just a second, definitely deserves the credit as being a great GM, obviously being the executive of the year in the NBA. He deserves all the praise for putting this team together, obviously, over the last few years. But as I said, I was very critical of those two guys in the past, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I didn't think they'd win a championship together. And that's mainly because I felt like in a lot of big moments, they deferred to Marcus Smart and let him take a lot of the big shots. They also started to turn the ball over late in games in the playoffs over the last 2 or 3 years. But obviously this year, things were a little bit better when you have Jrue Holiday, who's a very short-handed point guard who can do anything you need on either end of the floor, offensively or defensively. And you have Kristaps Porzingis to stretch the floor as well. And then Derek White improved a lot over the last couple of years. That took a lot of the pressure off of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And things obviously worked out for them. So credit to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. As I said, they played 107 playoff games together before winning a championship, which was the most ever by a duo before winning a championship in NBA history. Tatum did lead the Celtics in playoff points this year, playoff rebounds, and playoff assists. He's now the 6th champion to ever do so in one single championship run. This is the first title for the Celtics since 2008, with both championships in 2008 and 2024 falling on June 17th, 6/17, which is obviously the Boston area code 617. So very special to see that happen yet again 16 years later. Al Horford won his first ring after playing 186 career playoff games. Finally won his first ring, which was the most ever by a player in NBA history without a ring. And now, obviously, that's in the past. Jrue Holiday deserves all the credit in the world. When the Celtics traded for him, I knew they meant business, and I knew they were making it out of the East when that trade went down. Before the Jrue Holiday trade happened, though, I probably would have sided with Cleveland getting out of the East, to be honest. But after Jrue Holiday was traded for, right away I said Jrue Holiday is an absolute winner and a great leader to have in the locker room. A very short-handed point guard who doesn't turn the ball over and steps up in big moments and has won before. Very well experienced and obviously a great leader in the locker room. Once the Celtics traded for him, I knew they were being legit. I knew they were going to get out of the East no matter what. Jrue Holiday is now the first player in NBA history to win a championship in his first year with 2 different franchises and played 30 minutes per game or more in those 2 playoff runs. And that comes from an NBA stat from their Twitter. So obviously Jrue Holiday deserves the credit. He was great in the playoffs. Could have won Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Was very good in the finals as well. You have to give Brad Stevens the credit he deserves as a GM. He traded Kemba Walker for Al Horford, held on to Jaylen Brown despite all of the trade rumors for Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler over the last few years, traded Romeo Langford and Josh Richardson for Derek White, traded Marcus Smart for Kristaps, Porzingis, and 2 first-round picks, re-signed Jaylen Brown despite heavy criticism for the pay he got, re-signed Jaylen Brown, which I said at the time last summer that the Celtics had to do that. They had no option. They could not let Jaylen Brown walk. I always felt like guys would get paid more and more over the next few years, so Jaylen Brown wouldn't be the highest paid player in the NBA for very long, and that's going to be the case when Jason Tatum gets his money very soon. But the reality is, guys get paid today that top dollar every single time. They keep resetting the market, so I was not surprised to see Jaylen Brown get that money last season, but Brad Stevens was criticized for that at one point. I supported that decision, obviously giving Jaylen Brown the money, and things did work out, obviously, for the Celtics and JB. And then the last move I want to mention, he traded Malcolm Brogdon and Robert Williams for Jrue Holiday, and that obviously ended up working out as well. So obviously a very good run here for Brad Stevens as the GM of the Celtics. Made a lot of great trades. Obviously a lot of those are very heartfelt and emotional trades, trading guys like Marcus Smart and Robert Williams, 2 guys that were fan favorites in Boston. But the reality is sometimes you have to mix up the core to try to get better pieces and see how things work. And obviously mixing up the chemistry did work out for the Celtics. It's obviously not an easy thing to do, to trade the heart and soul of a team like Marcus Smart, but the reality is sometimes mixing things up can change things and obviously let other guys shine and give you a little bit different look at a lineup that could potentially win an NBA championship, and that ended up being the case. Jrue Holiday was the missing piece that the Celtics needed. Once the Clippers got banged up at the end of the season, I knew there was only one team that could probably match the Celtics in a 7-game series and give them a run for their money, and that was Minnesota. I felt like Cleveland could do it in the East, but once Donovan Mitchell was hurt, that wasn't going to be the case. If Donovan Mitchell was healthy, that definitely would have been different. I think it would have been a 6 or a 7-game series. But with the Celtics obviously having a lot of injuries in their way in their playoff run, I know a lot of people are criticizing them for that. They don't pick and choose who they're playing against. So even though, yes, it was an easier run technically because Terry Rozier and Jimmy Butler were hurt in the first round, and then in the second round, you had Jared Allen miss some games, and Donovan Mitchell missed some games, and Karis LeVert missed the last game of the series. And then in the next round, the Indiana Pacers did not have Tyrese Halliburton for most of the series. He was out, so obviously that was a big loss for them. And then if you look at this series against the Dallas Mavericks, everybody was healthy. But I know a lot of people are talking about the Celtics and saying that they had an easier run. Yes, they did have an easier run, but that should not take away from them winning the NBA championship. They were the best team overall. That's just the reality. But there was only one team that I thought, besides Cleveland, that could give the Celtics a run for their money, and that was the Minnesota Timberwolves. I didn't think the Celtics were going to lose to Cleveland in a 7-game series, but I thought it would go 7 games. I did think the Minnesota Timberwolves would have beaten the Celtics in a 7-game series, though. I thought they would have matched up very well with Boston because of their defense and size. That ended up obviously not happening, but the Celtics now are the first team since the 2016-2017 Warriors to have the best regular season record and win the title. So obviously that just shows it is very, very hard to win a championship, even despite being the best record in the NBA regular season. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Kevin Durant trade packages that I've made. So the first one being with the Utah Jazz and the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix in this deal would get John Collins, Colin Sexton, Taylor Hendricks, a 2026 first-round pick via Cleveland or Minnesota, a 2028 and a 2030 pick swap, and a 2029 unprotected first-round pick. Utah has a lot of first-round picks to work with in the future, so I think they're going to move on from a few of those and get a huge piece to pair with Lauri Markkanen, who they're hoping to re-sign this offseason. And in this deal, they'd be getting Kevin Durant, which would be a great acquisition next to Lauri Markkanen. I do expect Utah to be very aggressive this offseason. And obviously Phoenix, they're in a tough position. They could just run it back and run back this team since they went all in. Maybe try to see if they can run it back with Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant, see what can happen. But I do think there's a chance they move on from one of those pieces. Bradley Beal would be tough to trade right now. So it's obviously in their best interest to probably try to move Durant or Booker if they're going to try to trade one of those pieces. And they could probably still get a good return back for one of those guys if they want to rebuild and get some draft picks back, since they really don't have any draft picks for the next decade just about. Moving on now to Miami and Phoenix. This is another trade package I made. Phoenix would get Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, and a 2029 first-round pick via Miami. And then Kevin Durant would be traded to Miami with Josh Okogie as well. My thought process in this trade is that I think Phoenix could use a point guard like Terry Rozier to facilitate that offense. As for Tyler Hero, he plays very similarly to Bradley Beal, so I think in this case, Phoenix would maybe look to move on from either Booker or Tyler Hero and completely try to at least work around potentially being 1 foot in and 1 foot out during a rebuild. If they trade Booker or Durant or trade both, obviously they're probably in a full rebuild if they trade both. But if they trade one and not the other, they're probably 1 foot in and 1 foot out of trying to contend and obviously rebuild as well, trying to get draft picks back. But I do think that trade could potentially happen. I do think Jimmy Butler could be out of Miami this offseason, so that could definitely make things interesting as well. So pay attention to that. Another trade proposal I made was the New York Knicks and Phoenix Suns making a deal. Phoenix would get Julius Randle, Bojan Bogdanovic, and 2 first-round pick swaps, along with 1 unprotected first-round pick, and then New York would be getting Kevin Durant in return. My thought process here is that the Knicks need another scorer next to Jalen Brunson. Kevin Durant in this deal would be going back to New York, back to the bright lights of New York, where he spent 4 seasons with the Brooklyn Nets, while the New York Knicks would be taking another step towards competing with the Celtics for the top spot in the East. Obviously, getting Kevin Durant would definitely help out that offense and definitely stretch the floor a little more. The Knicks do have all their first-round picks for the most part over the next 7 or 8 years, so they could potentially go out and move some of those picks to try to get somebody back to pair with Jalen Brunson. Next up, we have Atlanta and Phoenix. Atlanta in this deal would be getting Kevin Durant, pair Kevin Durant with Trae Young, and Jalen Johnson, who had a great season this past year. And we'll see if Atlanta holds on to that first pick or not in this year's draft. In this trade proposal, I do have Atlanta holding on to that first pick. But the reality is, if they do trade for Kevin Durant, they're probably going to have to give up that first overall pick. But in this deal, I have Phoenix getting DeJounte Murray to be their starting point guard. Then they also get DeAndre Hunter, AJ Griffin, a 2025 first-round pick via Sacramento, a 2030 unprotected first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, and a pick swap as well. So obviously this deal is a little bit crazier. I do think they'd probably have to give up that first overall pick in this deal. I didn't have that originally when I made this a couple weeks ago, but now looking at it, they'd probably have to give up that first overall pick since it's the biggest commodity probably, considering even though this draft people are saying is on the weaker side, it is still the first overall pick, so you get anybody you want with that selection. I will give my mock draft for the NBA draft probably over the weekend. Next up, we have the Sacramento Kings and Phoenix Suns making a deal. In this deal, the Kings would be getting Kevin Durant, so a legitimate scorer next to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, and then obviously Keegan Murray, who's a big piece of that offense as well. Adding Kevin Durant would definitely open that offense up even more. In this deal, Phoenix would be getting Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, Sasha Vezenkov, Davion Mitchell, 2 first-round pick swaps, and 2 unprotected first-round picks. I'd love to see Sacramento add Kevin Durant. I think he'd potentially bring them to the Western Conference Finals. If they do make that deal and maybe add another piece next to those guys I mentioned, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and Keegan Murray, I do think they could potentially be in the Western Conference Finals if they do go out and get Kevin Durant. Next up, my last trade proposal here is the Phoenix Suns and Memphis Grizzlies making a deal. Memphis would be getting Kevin Durant, so you add a primetime scorer next to an offense that already has John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and Gigi Jackson. Memphis is definitely underrated. If healthy, they're capable of being a top 4 seed in the West. They still need another piece, and they obviously need to stay healthy, but if they were to stay healthy, I think this team is very dangerous. Memphis did want Kevin Durant badly back in February of 2023. They were ready to send all of their draft picks to Brooklyn in a deal to try to get him. Obviously, that ended up not being the case. Durant wanted to go to Phoenix, and the Brooklyn Nets obviously honored his request and sent him to Phoenix, but Memphis was definitely in the conversation, and in this deal, they'd be getting Kevin Durant. In return, they'd be sending Marcus Smart to Phoenix to be their point guard. They'd be adding Luke Kennard, Brandon Clark, and 3 unprotected first-round picks. That offense, though, with Kevin Durant, Gigi Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and John Morant would be a very, very fun team to watch. That's definitely a team to watch out for if this trade ever were to go down. I do think Memphis is going to be very, very good next year. Right now, I think if healthy, they're potentially a team to watch out for in the Western Conference Finals. As of right now, today on June 20th of 2024, if that team is healthy, I think Memphis is in the Western Conference Finals next year. I really do. If they add another piece, and obviously they stay healthy, I think they're in the Western Conference Finals next year and competing for the NBA Finals potentially. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Dan Hurley, who decided to stay at UConn, declining a 6-year, $70 million deal with the Los Angeles Lakers. In the same offseason, over the last 2 or 3 months, he's turned down deals with the biggest program in college basketball history at the University of Kentucky, and also turned down the biggest franchise in the NBA and maybe even the biggest sports franchise in the world in the Los Angeles Lakers. He obviously is very, very loyal to UConn, and you have to respect that. Money could not move him or change his priorities, and I really, really respect that. Dan Hurley's looking to three-peat this upcoming season with a lot of talent returning to UConn. This deal with the Lakers would have made him one of the 6 highest-paid coaches in the NBA, ends up turning it down and decided to stay at UConn, where he's going to get another extension very, very soon. Obviously, it was hard for him and his wife to try to leave UConn and leave Connecticut. Obviously, being in Connecticut and being in LA, two very, very different situations living-wise. So obviously, it would have been a major adjustment. But obviously, it does show money does not always have to be the answer. And obviously, the big team name doesn't always have to be the big answer as well. It showed it does not always have to be about money and the big team name. Hurley's had a lot of success in college. He took Wagner, who is a 5-26 team the year before he arrived, and had them be a 25-6 overall team in his last year at the program. Then with Rhode Island, they were 7-24 the year before he arrived, and then 26-8 in his last season. And then at UConn, right before he arrived, they were 14-18 overall, and then 37-3 this past season. He's had a lot of success for a reason in college. He's a very good college coach and a great basketball mind overall. So I really respect his decision to stay at UConn. Obviously, it's tough to turn down that money, but he's obviously very loyal to the UConn name, and obviously his family did prefer to stay in Connecticut over LA. And like I noted, two very different living situations, but he did weigh it completely. He went about everything the right way. He was very open and honest with the Lakers and the UConn coaches as well, and the UConn program. Ends up staying and obviously making a decision for his family, and I do respect that. Obviously, he chose to stay at UConn over Kentucky, and now the Lakers. It shows he's very, very dedicated and loyal to the program. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Monty Williams, who was fired after just one season with the Detroit Pistons. He's still be getting paid by the Pistons and also the Suns, getting paid by both teams to not be their head coach. He's leaving Detroit with 5 years, $65 million left on his deal, $85 million in buyouts over the last 2 years. Obviously getting $20 million from the Suns last year and now $65 million in a buyout from Detroit. That's $85 million over the last year now in buyouts from both the Suns and the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons finished with the worst record in the NBA, 14-68 overall. They did show some flashes at some points of the year. They beat Oklahoma City at one point. They barely lost to the Celtics, a game where they were up by 20 points at half. And then they lost to the Clippers as well. But that was a game where they were up at halftime against the LA Clippers. So they did show a lot of flashes this year and compete with a lot of teams that were very good and had a lot more proven talent than they had. Here's the thing with Detroit. They have a lot of young talent. Once they figure it out, which could be next year or the season after, I do think they're going to be very dangerous. I'm a big fan of JJ Redick. I think he's going to be a top 3 big man in the NBA, like an even better Bam Adebayo. I would not blame Monty Williams for the reason why they struggled this year. That was just a young team, still inexperienced. I'm honestly shocked that they made the decision to fire him after just 1 year, but that's a league at the end of the day. It's a results business. They were expected a little bit more this season from him, and obviously things didn't work out. But when you have Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, that's a solid building block for the future. I do expect this team to be better next year, and I do think maybe a year or two from now, they'll be in a much better place and potentially be contending in the East. I thought this year would be a year for them to take a step up and be in the conversation to be a play-in team. That obviously ended up not being the case, but I do think they still have the talent, the young talent to build around. I expect this team to be better next year. We don't know who their coach will be, but we'll find out probably within the next month or so. One guy who we know will not be their next head coach is JJ Redick. He just signed a 4-year deal with the Los Angeles Lakers to be their next head coach. Obviously, he's been great as an analyst for ESPN. I've really enjoyed his commentary. He brings a lot of insight, a lot of intelligence, a very, very high basketball IQ to the game. The issue here is being in LA, there's just so much pressure on the head coach. They've had 7 coaches over the last 11 years. So obviously that shows that coaches really don't stay around there for long, and that might have been part of the reason Dan Hurley decided to stay at UConn. Maybe he's waiting to potentially be the future coach for another franchise like the New York Knicks if they ever got rid of Tom Thibodeau. We'll see how things work out there, but I do think Dan Hurley factored that into his decision, knowing there's so much pressure on you in LA, considering it's a big market. LeBron James, who could potentially opt out, may still be there. Anthony Davis. It's obviously tough to be in LA and be the head coach of the Lakers. So I do think this job is going to be tough for JJ Redick. With that being said, I do think he's qualified. I do think he knows the game very, very well. He's very experienced, had a long NBA career, knows the game just as good as anybody. But the issue here is you're in LA. There's going to be a lot of pressure on you to try to figure things out and have success right away. And we'll see if LeBron James even sticks around. I do think he might leave the LA Lakers. Right now, I'd say it's about a 60% chance he leaves LA and moves on from the Lakers. Maybe a 70% chance. I'll actually up that. I'll go from 60% to 70% chance. I think LeBron James opts out and leaves the Los Angeles Lakers. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not, but I do think JJ Redick's going to have a lot of pressure on him. Do I think he's going to succeed there? I do think he has the ability to succeed there. He knows the game very well, has a very high basketball IQ, a very good basketball intelligence, and obviously has a lot of experience in the league. But I do think it's going to be a very, very hard job considering the market and the team and the players they have on that roster. With all that being said, though, I do think he has what it takes to be a great head coach in the NBA. I really do. I know he's young, and I know he's only been out of the league now for a couple seasons, but he's been very good as an analyst. And if you listen to his podcast with LeBron James, his basketball IQ is very, very high. So obviously that doesn't always translate to being a great head coach. You still have to relate to the players. You still have to make in-game adjustments and make decisions on the fly and obviously change game plans from one game to the next for each and every team you play. But he's obviously been a part of the NBA for a very long time. So I do think this isn't a bad hire by the Lakers at all. But I do feel bad for JJ just because it is a very, very tough job to take considering all the pressure on you as the Lakers head coach. And now with that stat that I just mentioned, they've had 8 coaches now since 2011. The average length of you being a head coach for the Lakers is around 1.5 years. So that just proves there's a lot of pressure with this job. And they're not afraid to move on from you very, very quickly, like they did to Darvin Ham, like they did to Frank Vogel, like they did from Luke Walton. They move on very, very quickly from head coaches. So it's not a very easy job. Since Phil Jackson left, this is now their 8th head coach since he left. And that's only since 2011. 8 head coaches since 2011 now. So we'll see what happens here with JJ Redick. Like I said, I do think he's qualified. He's a very, very good basketball mind. But the Lakers are not an easy franchise to go to. They aren't. Reality is, though, he knows the LA market. He played for the Clippers for a long time. I know he's been working with ESPN and living in Brooklyn, so he's going to have to move across the country. And obviously being in a big sports market, just like being in New York, he's going to be in LA. So he's obviously used to being in a big sports market. But there is definitely more pressure there when you're the head coach than there is when you're playing for the Clippers. Definitely. Being with the Lakers, there's a lot more pressure on you as head coach than being a Clippers player. That's just a reality. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.